The new Warner Brothers Discovery is making a lot of changes, and we're about to see a lot more changes. We've already seen the Wonder Twins project canceled. It sounds like they sent back the script from Ta-Nehisi Coates regarding his Superman and told him to kind of revamp the entire thing. And now we have the Batgirl movie, which was intended for HBO Max, not theaters, has been scrapped altogether, even though they've already spent upwards of $100 million on this. And here to talk with me about that is my good friend Josh, who's not only a DC Comics aficionado, but he also used to write in Hollywood. He worked for Glee, Bloodline. There's a couple other projects out there. So you have some knowledge about the inner workings of Hollywood, correct, Josh?
Correct. I had my stint there. My fair share of time was spent in LA, so I've dabbled in the film industry for a little while.
Warner Brothers will no longer release Batgirl, the DC film that already completed shooting and was expected to arrive on HBO Max this year. The unusual move comes after a change in leadership at Warner's, with newly installed Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav prioritizing cost-cutting measures and refocusing Warner's on creating theatrical films rather than projects for streaming. Batgirl was budgeted at around $80 million, with costs rising to nearly $90 or $100 million due to COVID-19 protocols. Batgirl's cast includes Leslie Grace as Barbara Gordon, Michael Keaton's return as Batman, J.K. Simmons as Barbara's father, Commissioner Gordon, and Brendan Fraser as the villain Firefly. So they're going to be taking just right off the top almost $100 million haircut not to release the movie, and they're taking a tax write-off so they can't do it like 15 years later. That's an enormous loss on their part, Josh.
It is, and potentially it isn't. It really kind of depends. I think, one of the things you have to look at is what their long-term strategy is. And what I'm hearing rumbling wise is that they don't have much faith in the movie. So, there's a couple of things going on here. They don't have much faith in the movie. There's rumors that they're doing away with scripted stuff for HBO Max in general, mainly because there's rumors that HBO Max is going to fold into Discovery Plus. So I think that's playing a key. And we talk about production budget, but production budget doesn't always include marketing, and marketing can sometimes equal or match what production budgets are. So if they were going to try to put this into theaters, they're looking at spending a good hefty chunk of change for that. And then if they don't have faith in it, it's probably not going to bring money in. And while there's insurance there to kind of help when movies don't sell, they might be looking at this as just the easiest way to cut ties, the easiest way to try to not lose even more money and just take the tax write-off, run with it, and see what they can go from there. Really interesting. You typically don't see this happen. I think one of the crazier things is usually when you have films like this, it's so hard to make something like this happen. Like, hey, we finished a movie, it's done, it's filmed, let's make it go away because of contracts. So that's what I'm really interested to hear more about and find out, because trying to get these contracts settled in a way that you don't release something is crazy, ridiculously hard, but they managed to make it happen.
It seems like David Zaslav, while they don't have a concrete plan for what DC Comics is going to be in film and on HBO Max, it seems like he wants the quality to raise up. And if this was going to be a black eye on the DCEU and HBO Max from day one, he would rather just kind of eat the money, not spend any more in marketing, and just move on with what they're doing. And I think that's not the worst idea. The DCEU itself has been so uneven just as far as quality, direction, even vision of what they're trying to accomplish these days, that I think this is probably smart. And if they have a vision for DC films, I don't think they wanted Batgirl to be a part of it anymore.
Yeah, I think on one hand, I'm happy to see that the quality seems to be a driving force behind this, because we've talked about this before, but if you go in and you damage a brand, it's really hard to recover that. And if you have, even if, the brand is Batgirl, maybe the broader universe is, half of DC's films suck and half of DC's films good, you're still damaging your brand with the films that aren't good. It seems like Zaslav understands that aspect and is trying to build something up. He's already mentioned that they have big plans for Detective Comics and what they want to do from a film aspect. So I think this is a good sign, as weird as this may be and as hard as this may be to swallow, that they're getting rid of a film. This could be good long term. So I'm hoping for the best. Now, quality is subjective. So what you and I view as good quality could be different than what Zaslav believes is good quality.
Well, according to the New York Post, who actually broke the story initially, which some people were refuting, but it's turned out to be true, the reportedly $70 million movie which sources said the budget actually ballooned to more than 100 million, was doing test screenings for audiences in anticipation of a late 2022 debut, would rank among the most expensive cinematic cast-offs ever. Those tests were said to be so poorly received by moviegoers that the studio decided to cut its losses and run for the sake of the brand's future. It sounds like they had a real stinker on their hands. They didn't want to just get that out there. You don't even want the test footage out there at that point.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is really interesting. There's a earnings call, a Warner Brothers earnings call today, and I'm curious to see what information comes out of that, because I think it might give us a little more insight. But it's all strange and uncommon.
Yeah, there's a lot of strange stuff. Obviously, you have the Ezra Miller Flash stuff going on. He's been in the news for all the wrong reasons. And it sounds like, that Flash movie is really supposed to be the Flashpoint, the real reboot for the DCEU moving forward, really establishing some things. And then you also have the Amber Heard stuff with Aquaman, the only DCEU movie to break $1 billion so far, the only one to make more money than The Dark Knight back in the day with Christopher Nolan. I'm assuming they're expecting that to make a whole lot of money. Do you want that tainted with that Amber Heard trial? And you had Walter Hamada, the DC Films chief, doing depositions live in the trial. It was insane.
Yeah, and you mentioned The Flash and that being a Flashpoint movie. Part of what was supposed to break out of this was Batgirl. That was supposed to be one of the kind of tent poles that they're going to try to push. Clearly, that's not happening. And it makes me wonder if it's only a matter of time before we get this news for the Supergirl stuff they were pushing, for Jaime Reyes, for Blue Beetle. Those are things that are already in the works, filming, kind of, done. What's going to happen with them? Heck, what's going to happen with The Flash? Are they going to cut this movie as well? Because are they going to look at it and go, you know what? There's just too much here. It's not worth it. Let's just take another loss and move on.
That one's budget's like $200 million.
I'm well aware. But, it's if the point of the film is to set up this universe you're not moving forward with, what's the point? And do you really think you're going to get much of a reaction from audiences coming to tune in and see this movie when there's such a negative scope around your lead? And honestly, looking at this, Warner Brothers has to get a little more strategic now, because they've got so many films now that have been tainted. They have two different projects that are their main brands for their film, for the production house. You've got DC and you've got the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. Both have been tainted by these same people. You've got Ezra Miller in both projects, and then both systems have been affected in one way or another between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. So it's there's got to be so much behind the scenes stuff going on right now that probably isn't thought about from I guess a general perspective. But it seems like Zaslav is not afraid to make bold decisions, and I think that's what Warner Brothers needs right now, is some bold decisions.
Well, we're about to see some bold decisions. It sounds like August is going to be the beginning of kind of another bloodbath, not just for DC Comics or DC Films, but everything. We've got this article from Deadline.com from the 31st of July talking about Warner Brothers Discovery. It says August has long been rumored to be the month of mass layoffs, with the first wave now expected as early as next week, as the honeymoon period for the new regime is coming to an end. There have been a handful of layoffs so far, along with high-profile executive departures like Warner Brothers CEO Ian Sarnoff, since the Discovery Warner Media merger was completed, but the majority of cuts are expected to start in August and wrap by Thanksgiving. Thousands of workers are expected to be affected as the company deals with a bigger mess than initially expected, and it also mentions layoffs are expected to be largely performance-based. Well, that's not good for DC Comics and a lot of people in the DCU, that they want some good performance out of this.
Looking at the layoffs, you kind of have to look at it from two perspectives. One, I would say keep in mind that some layoffs have already happened. Two, whenever you merge companies like they're doing, you're going to have people that are doing the same thing. So a lot of that's where you're going to see your cuts. They're going to look at it as hey, there's a lot of fat. We need to trim it. We don't need two chiefs and one Indian. Let's just get one Indian. Or one chief will hire another Indian down the road. So I expect that's where you're going to see a lot of the performance base come from. But yeah, DC Comics in general, I don't know how high they are in this totem pole of getting cuts made. But
they're trying to save $3 billion.
They are.
And you're not going to get a lot of that out of DC Comics. I bet their operating budget is probably under 150 or something.
Aside from Jim Lee, Jim Lee's taking a good chunk of that. But The other thing with DC too is, and this is where Zaslav probably doesn't have the best knowledge to come in and make decisions, is, there's not a lot of extra baggage at DC. If anything, they're too thin. So to be able to come in and say like, hey, you're not performing, you're out, they may not have anyone else to step in. So that's probably going to be something that happens further down the road.
And that's a Warner Media issue, Josh, because
agreed.
It wasn't just Bloody Friday for DC Comics. That was Bloody Friday for everything under Warner Media. They just started firing everybody while they were over at AT&T. So they've already been kind of cut to the bone and have a bare bones operation right now.
Yep. Absolutely. And again, you're going to see more. Like, it's been rumored it's going to happen. I think it'll be interesting to see how quietly or publicly it happens, though. I think that'll kind of give us some insight as well.
The article did continue. Warner Brothers Discovery has the libraries of DC Comics, Harry Potter, Hanna-Barbera, and Looney Tunes, a collection matched only by Disney with Marvel, Lucasfilm, Star Wars, and Pixar. Property management of the big franchise is a top priority, with finding a DC chief who can revitalize the comic book universe the way Kevin Feige has done with Marvel of utmost importance. There's been much chatter about new Harry Potter extensions, including a TV show, and Zaslav is understood to have recently met with creator J.K. Rowling. That is going to upset some people on the interwebs, Josh, but the big thing in there, it definitely sounds like there is no faith whatsoever in Walter Hamada leading DC Films. Like, they need somebody else to take charge, because it's quite apparent that Zaslav is not impressed with what he has done at DC, films in the DC universe.
Walter Hamada has had just a strange approach where he's kind of like just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, and it's not going to work for him here. They're looking for something that I think is going to be more streamlined and concise, like what Feige created with Marvel. It seems like that's what they're hinting at. So you need someone to come in and be that executive producer role, that kind of director that navigates where that brand is going to go. And you mentioned J.K. Rowling. People on the interwebs can get as mad as they want. Harry Potter is still making a ton of money for them. Yeah, this last film did not do well. I think there's a lot of reasons you could say why, it didn't perform as well at the theater. Again, Ezra Miller was in that. You took Johnny Depp out of a role. The film itself was not that great. It didn't get a good buzz or word of mouth going for it. Specifically with J.K. Rowling, she's proven before she can make something happen. So they're going to try to do that again. Film series, I wouldn't be surprised if film series-wise on the Harry Potter front, you see them actually redo the books as a series. That way you can get more in without having to cut so much. That way you get all those supporting characters fully developed and going forward. But that might be another 5 to 10 years from now. DC... there's been rumors of people that they've gone out and talked to run and become like a Kevin Feige. Who they get is really going to be, that's going to be the linchpin. Part of me wants to say Jeff Johns would be the great guy from a comics aspect, but he's had so much baggage brought on between what happened of him stepping in with the previous DC films that I don't foresee it being him. They're going to get somebody else. Who is that? I don't know. Who could do it well? I don't know. It's a good question.
You can't blame him, because if you look at Kevin Feige's success, how many things that have been announced in the MCU actually got canceled, never made it? I think there was an Inhumans movie, which I think became a TV show, but that's about it.
Yeah, and even that, like, you can't even say it got canceled because they just had to, and this is again where I said contracts come into play, and it makes it so hard to just make something disappear. Contracts were in play. They wanted to get rid of Inhumans. Feige didn't even want Inhumans to begin with.
That was Perlmutter, yeah.
Yeah. So, he found a way to just like knock it off. Like, hey, this is TV now, run with it.
But if you look at Walter Hamada in DC films, you've had Gotham City Sirens, you've had different versions of Batman, Superman. The original Justice League was supposed to be 2 movies. It got truncated to 1. There's supposed to be a Man of Steel sequel. They've had like all these plans, and like I would say 2/3 of all the stuff they've announced never made it to film.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's almost like they took a strategy of, because they hadn't had success with so many things that they should have had success with. It was almost like hey, let's start, leaking this information out to the public to see what the response was. Because there's supposed to be a Nightwing film. That never happened. There's so many things that they announced were in pre-production, and so many things go into pre-production. I'm sure Marvel has had a ton of things come into pre-production that they stopped or shelved or whatever. They just didn't publicly announce that it was in pre-production. So they were smart about it. Because what happened with Warner Brothers and DC is they announced all these projects and then announce that they canceled them or stopped talking about them. And that creates a negative environment. That creates a negative conversation about your brand and what you're doing. And it starts to make it look like you can't competently make something happen. And then even the films that you do release are either a box office bomb or narratively, they don't respond well with audiences. It's been like lose, lose, lose for Walter Hamada. So he's definitely gone. I'm just curious to see who they replace him with.
I'm with you. Do you have any final words regarding the Batgirl film that was originally scheduled to go out on HBO Max just being cut altogether, even though they've already spent like $100 million on it, and some of these other rumblings regarding layoffs?
I mean, the only thing that I would say is I hope at some point Warner Brothers Discovery will actually do something to support the cast. Because this isn't a fair shake for them. And, you know, you have someone like Leslie Grace, who's not a star, but was kind of up and coming and had some breaks here and there. And, you know, for her, this could have been career changing for her. The movie wasn't good, so hopefully it turns out that this is a good decision for her. But I hope that the company has enough respect to say, hey, we know we kind of like screwed you over here. We're going to throw you a bone. We want you to come do this. So I hope we do see that as a way of kind of mending relationships, because you don't want to be a production company that's known for just like not caring about the people that are making your work, because then you're not going to be able to hire good talent.
Speaking of impending disasters within the DCEU, the rumors were out there that Sasha Calais' Supergirl was going to be replacing Henry Cavill's Superman in the DCEU. And it looks like those are actually true. There's some screenings going on for the new Flash movie, and it does appear that she's going to be replacing Superman in the DCEU. This is a terrible mistake. We don't have enough new information for me to do another video, but I've already talked about this and why it's such an impending disaster for DC films.